Good afternoon, everyone, and another question and answer session and an update on the race so far, what's happening, and there's plenty happening, even though there's only 6 boats left sailing. Obviously, Igor finally made it into port, and he's been working on his barnacle situation. Really was quite dramatic, that whole issue of the anti-foulings and what's working, what's not, is a story yet to be told fully. Everyone wants to know what brand anti-fouling did they use and so on. And I should point out there's a few issues there, because it may not be the brand of the anti-fouling, it might be how it was applied and what actually happened in the interim. Just quickly on Igor, his paint was applied in Spain. He sailed from the Mediterranean around through the Straits there out into the ocean, out to UK, Falmouth, came to Les Sables d'Olonne, the race village, and then about 3 or 4 days before the start, they slipped the boat and power washed the bottom down, and they didn't repaint it. They put it straight back in. So the paint had been on for a while, then washing it off, it's an ablative paint, so you lose some of the actual layers on there, and they put it back in the water, and I think that's the general start of Igor's problems. In the case of Mark Sinclair, who also got into port and has now retired and had a heap of barnacles that you probably saw, he was in a similar situation where they painted the boat in Australia, shipped it to the UK, put it in the water, and I don't believe they painted the bottom again. So some anti-foulings don't like that whole routine of being left out drying for a long period of time. So I think the application in both of those instances could have been a bit better. In the case of Tapio, it was the wrong paint, simply the wrong paint, not built for the job. So someone's in trouble there, and it's not Tapio because he ordered the right paint. In the case of, who else had barnacles on Uku, we're not sure what happened there, because that was done here in France, but it was some time before the start of the race. And the barnacles themselves, you want to Google it. If you just Google goose barnacles, you can get this whole life cycle and reports on them and so on. They're tricky little fellas. They can actually latch on while the boat's moving, and then they create their own super glue, stick on, continue to grow really fast. So, and most solo sailors around the world at some stage will get a few on the boat, some more than others, it's a real issue. And I'm sure in 22 that will be solved. But anyway, moving along to Tapio, still enjoying his ride. He really wanted to and had an occasion to dive on the hull, and on both occasions there were sharks around. One time there was up to 3 sharks, he thinks there was 3, cruising around, and he told me the story on the phone, and I think some of you may have heard it, where they were literally waiting. As soon as he started to walk off the ladder in the water, crikey, saw the first one, they wouldn't go away. So he's given up on that routine now. He says he's quite prepared to sail all the way to France with the barnacles on board, and he says if it takes another month, he's not worried. His race is over as far as he's concerned, in the sense of being competitive. He doesn't think he can catch Istvan, so he's happy to enjoy time at sea, and he is. So he makes it to the east every day. Istvan's had little problems. He did solve the scenario with his steering pedestal. He's made a couple of bearings which have supported stop the wobble, which might mean that he doesn't completely collapse the gearbox. He's got a solid link system, so there's no wires. It's actually hard rods and teeth that mesh together and so on that then links into the rudder and steers the boat that way. So he seems reasonably happy with that and very proud of himself on making that steering gear. Or the pedestal change. He's very low on water. He found some more Gatorade. But you may have noticed, if you followed the onboard video of Mark Sinclair when he got to port, the little Survivor 06 desalinator. Now, it's a little black thing about this big with a handle on it. You put one end in salt water, you start pumping it, you get a reject salt water line, and you get a freshwater line. If you're in a life raft pumping this thing, you just put it in your mouth and start drinking. Now, I started selling these. We sold thousands of these to the military in Australia as survival gear, and I started that association in 84, I think it was. It started, and did that for 20 years or more. And back then I got a real surprise, because you used to get 200 mils of water for an hour of pumping, but actually now you're getting 800 millimeters, so not quite a litre for 1 hour of pumping. And Mark used it for the last 4 or 5 days of his trip. All the entrants have got those desalinators. They're not meant for continuous use, so you wouldn't use it for 300 days around the world. They wouldn't last that long. They're meant for survival situations in life rafts and as a means of last resort to make water. And so I'm not personally too worried if someone out in our fleet is going to run out of water. They can survive, and they can survive for a month or so until the rain comes, using that handheld desalinator. So Istvan's getting low. Generally, he dodged that storm. There was a nasty looking storm coming. Unfortunately, first of all, the storm didn't intensify. It actually did the reverse. It was actually weakening as the final approach in the last 24 hours of that. And secondly, it kept its track. There's always the worry. You know, we initially I thought Istvan could outrun it to the east. He couldn't. So in the last 48 hours, I said head south as quick as you can, and that worked because the track was as forecast and it went past him over the top. He's now heading east to the Horn. And we've now told him there's a couple of dandies coming behind. You may have seen it on the video update I did this morning. And he needs to stay basically as high a latitude where he is now and try not to go too much lower, because if he goes lower, the storm, which is going southeast, still might connect with him, and it's quite a big one. So that'll play out in the next 3 days. So hopefully he'll be fine with that one as well. Uku looks okay. If he kept on his current course and track, he might just meet a bit of a blow at Cape Horn. So we put a suggestion to him, might pay to just slow up just a little bit, just to make certain he doesn't get there and get hooked up in that. And if that's the case, if he misses that one going around on about the night, I think it was the 19th or so, then he'll have an easy run around the Horn and start heading up towards the Falklands. The interesting one now is this whole issue with Jean-Luc and Mark Slats. True to form, we predicted about 5-6 days ago that Mark will get to within 700 miles, which means he's taken out about 450 miles in the last week or so. And that actually happened. Then the winds have gone headwinds for Mark, so he actually did it tough last night and basically hove to this morning. Now, that's like the big no-no word. Oh, you don't hove to in the Southern Ocean because it's very dangerous to get a rollover. Absolutely correct. But in this instance, first of all, he's not in the Southern Ocean, and he kept sailing and managing the boat proactively with the headwinds until such time as the headwinds dropped right down, because he had about 40 knots or so and a big sea, 5-metre seas. But then eventually the sea dropped out to about 2.5, maybe 3 metres, and the wind dropped back to about 20 knots, and it's dead on the nose where he wants to go. So rather than tack it away, he probably would have been a bit tired after managing it for those other stronger headwinds. He decided to hove to, which is perfectly fine in moderate weather. You're not likely to get done in, touch wood. So he stopped. He's not making any progress north. He's only doing 1 knot. And then if we go forward to Jean-Luc, if you saw my video update this morning, there are these 3 regions of wind, and I'll describe it just back to front to you. If he is he is Brazil on this side to you, the screen. The winds coming across from the Atlantic come straight towards the coast. One part goes up over the top in towards the Caribbean. One part comes into the coast, and the other part turns down like this. And Mark's down here. He's got the headwind band. Jean-Luc has had it for the last week or something. And now he's managed to break through to the easterly wind zone. So he's now going north at about 4.5, 5 knots. That's a good thing. If he can keep that, he's met them pretty early. If he can get far enough north quick enough, the easterlies will hold. He'll maintain a reach and keep going north. And then after that, it goes to southeasterly winds as the winds turn around up into the Caribbean. And he'll ride those all the way through. So it looks like he may get a break and get running fast before Mark can catch up to his wind pattern. And what that could say, what could evolve maybe, is in sort of a week to 10 days from now, Jean-Luc may have actually recovered his lead and be back about 1,300 miles in front of Mark, because he's got to break out first and Mark's going to be behind. That opens the game completely, because there's then a couple of weeks of very consistent weather where it'll be boat for boat. There's no real tactics on where you can go and where you can't go. It's consistent winds like trade winds, so they'll both have a breeze. And then the next lot of tactics will come further up into the Atlantic, where you might get some big storms and so on. So the race is still very much on at the moment for first place. And it's completely different than the way it was looking a couple of days ago. I was thinking, wow, maybe Jean-Luc's got a problem, because when he had those light headwinds, the hole and the slit down the mast where the bolt connecting the lowers had been attached increased. You may have noticed that on the tweets. It's actually torn a little bit more. Jean-Luc had to go up the mast again to restrap it and put some extra lashings on, which he's now done, running down to the deck and so on. He seems reasonably happy with that, but he's certainly absolutely committed to not risking that rig. So he's not driving hard. He's got to get home. He doesn't care whether he's first, second, third or whatever. He just knows he has to get to the finish line. So many factors there. And of course, Mark Sinclair, if you heard the phone call we did live earlier last week, he is in love with Jean-Luc. He is always in his mind, Jean-Luc, my friend, Jean-Luc, every minute of the day. All his thinking and focus is Jean-Luc. So there's a bit of fun going on there, and anything can happen, so watch this space. Igor should be away, or could be away in a couple of days. I think his work job list is just about done, and he said he'd planned to get underway by the Monday. So, he'll be a happy chappy, no doubt about that. I mean, we'll see normal boat speeds now, because you've got to remember, the first month or so, first couple of months of Igor, he was sailing like a champion, the boat was really flying. I'll never forget the impression when he came through Lanzarote, and he was light by comparison to the others, because this boat, the Endurance 35, is a big boat. It could carry the weight of a year's worth of food and stuff really well. It was sailing on its marks and sailing really well. So anyway, that's good for him, and he'll be happy to head up this way, and hopefully he can make it for the prize giving. I'm not sure on April 22nd, but we'll just have to wait and see. So now I'll just go through some questions, not as many as last week, but there's some interesting ones. So Carol Butler was asking, hang on. Is a challenge greater or less than is the psychological challenge greater or less than in 1968? And I suppose the short answer is it's hard to tell. This is tough, there's no question. The challenges are still very much the same. They're different, but the essence of the challenge is still the same. I mean, we know that the boats can get around. The technology is sort of there. Basic technology. I mean, the boats are built strong. The rigs are built strong. I'm as surprised as anyone that we're losing rigs. But I always come back to the simple philosophy that at the end of the day, 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're in a storm, even though you've got EPIRBs and you've got life rafts and you've got all the safety gear in the world, it's just you and your boat in the Southern Ocean, and you are completely isolated. So that puts a serious level of stress and reality. It's like a reality check. So that's pretty much the same. Yes, they've got radios that are working, and there's some communication component, but you've got to go back to 1968. I mean, the communications back then were different. They didn't have the intense communication in 1968 when they're living in the system and society. So the change was epic for them, going from basic listen to the radio, read the newspapers, to nothing. Here, it's like 24 hours a day, internet, iPhones, videos, all that stuff, to quite a substantial drop in communication. So it's very similar. So I think it's the same, but there's one huge point of difference, and that's the psychological benefit of knowing there's other yachts out there. Not that they can help you, you just know they're there. And it's sort of like this football team mentality. When you take off, you've got, we're all going out there, it's a lot of fun. They talk on the radio chat session. That's a huge psychological boost, and that is completely different than when you're just out there one sailor with no other boats around. So in that instance, I'd say it was tougher in 68 than now. So anyway, okay, so Oliver Schonrock, can we, instead of using a no-go zone, which is a straight line, can we use waypoints? And we discussed this a little bit just towards the end before the race started. And basically, it's a good idea, but I didn't want to change it for this event. We'll consider it for the next one. And the difference is this, that you all know the no-go zone. It's a big block area. They can't go into it. If they're in it, they get a time penalty. So it's meant to keep the boats away and keep them out of the ice zone and where the worst weather is. What you can do if you have a waypoint, so instead of having a long line that goes for 3,000 miles or something, you have a point there, couple here and there, and the boats can go anywhere between, but they have to go around those points. Anywhere between, around those points. So they can move around with the weather, but they have to go around that waypoint. It allows a bit of flexibility for the sailors, and it means they don't constantly have to monitor that line. The problem is, what happens if they miss one of those loops? What's the time penalty if they don't go around one of those waypoints? And that could happen if they're in a storm. What do you do? And that's harder to manage than having a straight line. So, but it's up for consideration. So that may happen in 2022. We'll think about it. Stephen Eddy, Suzy lost a spinnaker pole quite some time ago, months ago, when she was handing it on the mast, disconnected the rope and didn't go, and bang, next minute it's over the side, gone. So she's now down to one spinnaker pole. We think, and her normal system is to store the spinnaker pole on the mast. So we think the reason that she lost that spinnaker pole was when the mast and rig went, the pole went with it. So she's now got no jury rig. And he brings up the point, there is a kite, like a kite surfing rig. You've all seen surfers with their kites up there. It's a sailing rig that you can control with lines. You connect it to the boat, like it's hard connected to the boat, so you're not holding onto the lines, but you can steer this kite. And it's a very satisfactory sailing rig, especially as a jury rig. And I think most of the sailors are aware of that. And it could be used by any of the GGR sailors. We spoke to one of the manufacturers of one of these sailing rigs beforehand, and we said to him, yeah, you can offer deals to any of the entrants and stuff. None of the entrants took it on, mainly because they were probably pushed for time, pushed for money. They had passed their jury rig for the poles, that's fine. We would never stipulate that entrants should have that over the spinnaker poles because they've already got their poles. So that'll always be the standard compulsory jury rig, a couple of poles. But any entrant could carry that sailing kite jury rig format. And it would be quite effective, so we haven't got anything against it at all. And in fact, there's a lot of discussion about using those rigs for like not container ships, but ships and freighters and stuff to give them assistance and save them fuel and so on. It's a good concept. Dave Morgan, what would happen if an entrant ended up in a country that they didn't intend to land in, so they wouldn't have visas, they might not have their passport if they've been recovered from their vessel or something? What would happen? It's pretty simple, really. If they were recovered in a rescue situation, usually the Rescue Coordination Centre notifies the embassy of the country nationality of the person who's been rescued, so they know they're coming. If they've got no passport, usually that embassy makes some sort of temporary arrangement as soon as they get in, gets proof of identity, and they can get all their travel documents and so on. So that's not too bad, and even organises their flight home if they don't have any money and they pay back the cost of the fare later. In our case, even when we're going to Australia for the film drop in Hobart, all the entrants had to have visas. That was part of the requirement of Border Force in Australia. We said we're coming in close inside the 12-mile limit, and it's a managed and planned event to stop. So even though they weren't going ashore or anything like that, everyone had to have visas, so just in case. Mike Phillips, Istvan's bearing on his pedestal for his steering gear. How did he make it, and is it going to work? And the first part of that is he basically spent a long time cutting some bearings. It's a simple system. You imagine a 1-inch shaft is between two bearings with the steering mechanism hanging down on that inside the pedestal, and then the steering wheel connected to that shaft. So he had to make these two bearings, and he did it manually over a long period of time, a lot of filing and cutting and so on, and it's pretty good. And then he epoxied them in place, and his description is very clear and very vivid on his SoundCloud. So if you want the full cover on that, how he did it, go to the GGR website, get onto the SoundCloud, click on Istvan, and he gives a full account of how he made it. And it seems to be okay, and it'll probably hold up. I know those systems pretty well because I had one myself on my Tradesman 35 and rebuilt it. And it should be okay. It should be okay. So watch this space. We'll have to wait and see. His option, if it wasn't working, was to call into the Falklands, and we discussed that with him. And if that was the case, he'd have to get parts flown in, and he'd be into Chichester class. We don't want that. Not after going all this way. So the second question from Mike was: Will Jean-Luc's mast hold up? Will it stay up? And what's my opinion on that? I think it will stay up for two reasons. One is that the repair that he's done seems pretty good. If the mast is not getting hammered, it should hold up. And Jean-Luc is the master mariner. He's been there, he's done that. He knows how to look after a rig and bear it. But something might come up that catches Jean-Luc by surprise. But what it may do, it may have a dramatic effect on his speed. But I'm pretty, I'm comfortable. I think Jean-Luc will get home. He knows what's going on. I put this here last week. We were talking about, this is a model of Jean-Luc's 80-footer, Adrian, that he sailed and still holds the record east-west, the wrong way around the world. Okay, he's still the fastest solo sailor around the world against the prevailing winds. And he lost his mast down off Antarctica on the first attempt. And we're just saying, so it happens to anyone. And Jean-Luc's had a lot of experience on that. It's happened to him a few times, and he's managed to get home in different ways. So So yeah, I reckon we'll see him sail through here. I hope so. Nick Floms, GGR is a huge inspiration to anyone who's ever thought, this is Ordinary Sailor, ever thought of sailing around the world in a race, okay? And he's obviously thinking about it. And he said he wants to know why we chose the boats we did, other than the fact that it was something like Suhaili. Because as you know, that's part of the argument we use. Suhaili was 32 feet, full keel, rudder on the trailing edge of the keel, very strong, solid boats. And the other reason is simply this, that I've been involved with solo sailing for a long time. I've got a lot of serious friends that have been involved there. I've followed solo sailing, as in watching other events and races, what's happening and what's going on. And the bottom line is that part of the concept of this race was to make it affordable and achievable for anyone that really wanted to do it. And so I sat down with a few people and said, right, if you could choose any style of boat, what would it be? Now I've got and I'll just bring this up again, it's not a very good picture of the boat, but this is Jessica Watson, right, sailing an SNS 34. She did solo non-stop round the world by the Capes in this SNS 34. The boats are about less than 5 tonne displacement. They're a fin keel and a skeg rudder down the back. Incredibly popular for solo sailing in Australia. There was about 150 of them, I think, built in Australia. And so Jessica used it. Jesse Martin, who you've seen, our cameraman, doco director, did a solo circumnavigation as well. Jesse was 16, Jesse was 17. And David Dix was 18. He went round solo non-stop. John Sanders went around 3 times. Once first with a couple of stops, then he did 2 consecutive straight away without stopping, twice around the world in SNS 34. Many others have done it. Others have done it in smaller boats. I just saw the Polish guy that went around in a 22-footer at the Paris Nautique Boat Show. Plenty have done it in bigger boats, similar boats. And of course, if you go back to Vito Dumas, over 50 years ago, a long time ago, in the middle of winter, he did it, and there's countless others, that have got smaller style boats, full keel boats. So they might not be the safest type boat, but a boat like a Rustler, a Tradewind 35, a Saga 36, an OE 32, all the ones that we've currently approved, they're incredibly strongly built. That's the first thing. So the boats are built strong. There's a lot of them around, so they're not expensive. They're not necessarily inexpensive, but they're not over the top. And to my mind, they're a lot better than a lot of the mass-produced, more recent fiberglass boats, where keels may become an issue, rudders may become an issue, and they may not have the longevity. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those boats. I'm just saying if I had to stake myself on it, I would rather go belts and brace and have a strong boat. Some people are saying now, I think these boats are really slow. Well, I've got to tell you, I don't know whether you heard Mark Slatz. He said he's cranked up over 15 knots, up to 20 knots. A lot of the entrants are saying these boats are light in heavy weather because they just take off. So you can see, I'm not saying that we chose these as the best boat or the most perfect boat. There is no such thing. Every boat is a compromise. But in my opinion, these boats are perfectly adapted to serious ocean sailing, all right, and that's part of the philosophy behind it. They're the boats that you could buy and sail it around the world without any dramas, going through Panama Canal, and the milk run, downwind trade. But not everyone wants to take them in the Southern Ocean, but I looked at these boats, and so did a lot of my friends and people that we know about, and said, yeah, they're solid boats, they're wholesome boats. And so I'll always defend the choice of these boats as being quite suitable for serious ocean sailing. I'm not saying they're the safest boats for ocean sailing. You try and tell me what's the safest and then put it in the context of ordinary boats. Every boat's a compromise. Every boat's got advantages and disadvantages, but these boats are strong and, it's achievable. So if you really want to do it, there's an opportunity in the GGR, and we certainly won't be changing the concept of the boats for 22. They'll be exactly the same boats, and we're quite confident that they're very seaworthy boats. Okay, so Jeff Salebrine, nice name, Salebrine. Would we consider in the 22 edition mandating and putting in the rules that because a keel step mast might be stronger than a deck step, and there's issues there as well because you can have bigger or smaller sections, would we consider mandating certain things like having a keel step mast and mandating you've now got to have an extra section size and you must have extra rigging, all these different things? And the short story is no, we won't. What we'll be doing And we've already made, if you read the notice of race, all sorts of suggestions, even for 88, about reliability and what you can and can't do. You can't make it any lighter. You know, the rigging's got to be minimum standard dimension. You can make it bigger. But everything we do for 22, and there will be a lot of things we'll be bringing up, will be recommendations. And the reason for that is we don't want to create a one design fleet. We don't want to tell people and prescribe everything they've got to do. You know, we say you've got to have a life jacket, but we don't tell you when you've got to wear it, right? That's the difference. And in case of the rig, we'll be saying you must do certain things which are already there, as a minimum, but after that it's up to you what you do and how you interpret it, because no one wants to lose their rigs, right? You know, I'm as surprised as anyone that we've lost 5 rigs or something. I doubt, you know, well, if all goes well, we won't lose that many in 22. The one thing that surprised me, I'm not hearing from any of the riggers yet and the mast makers. It's quite surprising, because we had some of the best in the world providing rigs for these boats and they failed. And I'm not getting any comments from them at all, but we'll certainly be talking to them, and just we're really interested to see what their opinion is on what we should and shouldn't be saying to entrants about how they should or shouldn't rig their boats in 22. And that'll be an interesting subject, because many of the entrants from this edition of the race will be back in 22, and they've had a lot of experience as well. And you know, let's wait and see what the boats look like when they line up in 22. But there's plenty of people applying, so it's going to be an amazing event. So yeah, we're not trying to restrict everything and tell everyone exactly what they've got to do, because we're about minimising risk. And then after that, there's some things that are going to be left obviously to individual interpretation. Okay, Tony Flore, describe the penalty box again. Okay, Istvan's got a penalty, and Jean-Luc's got a penalty, and there may be others before the end, we don't know. The idea is, if here's Les Sables d'Olonne at the finish, and here's the equator down here, as they're sailing north, they'll eventually sail through what's called 45 degrees north latitude. So equator 0, you go 10, 20, 30, 40, then there's 45. Les Sables d'Olonne's above that. So as they sail up, at some point they can decide anywhere along that line, which goes east to west, as soon as they cross that line, they have to turn around and go back and cross back down below 45 degrees south. Then they have to sail around here doing their time penalty for 18 hours in the case of Jean-Luc. And when he comes back up to head towards Les Sables d'Olonne, he has to be within 40 miles of where he went through the 45 degrees south whenever he turns. So the penalty box can be sort of anywhere, but it starts from the moment they backtrack and go down below 45 degrees north latitude. Okay, Sasha Egbert. What's the average water consumption of the entrants in the race? I don't know. I've got no idea. But it's, as a rule of thumb, you're supposed to drink about half a gallon a day to remain hydrated. If you're working hard in the tropics, you'll drink more. If you're all rugged up in the Southern Ocean and sometimes you're sweating a lot, you know, so you still need more. So as a rule of thumb, half a gallon a day, 2 litres a day is sort of a good average to think about. I know some are using less. Some will be using more. If they use it for cooking, it's more again. So it varies, but that's the rule of thumb. And remember, they've got the manual desalinator. And some set off with a lot more water than others. So that's playing out a bit as well. Robert Reynolds, Suzy's pitch pole. She got a Rustler 36, so Suzy pitch poled, lost her rig. Jean-Luc, Rustler 36, pitch poled, and managed to keep his rig, but actually stripped one bolt in the mast, cut down through the section. And he wonders whether the 1.5 metres off the mast section had an impact on that, whether that saved the rig. I think it's a tall ask for me to say yes it did or no it didn't, because even with pitch poles, there's probably different types of pitch poles. You know, some might be faster, some might be slower, and we don't know exactly what happened to the boats. So it's a bit unfair to assume that just because you pitch pole, the loads are the same on both boats. You know, that's not necessarily the case. And I just come back to another comment I made with 2 old blokes the other day. If you saw our video with Robin and I talking, I distinctly remember standing in between. You know, we had Suzy's boat here on the marina, and there's a little walkway, and there's Jean-Luc's boat. And the contrast for the rigs was stunning to the extreme. You looked at Suzy's rig, it was a massively big Selden spar, you know, with all, you know, magic spreaders and beautiful boom, you know, just solid as a rock. In fact, it looked quite a lot bigger than what I would have thought was the standard Rustler 36 rig. I don't know. I haven't spoken to Suzy about the rig. You know, we will later on. But it was just massive. And you looked at Jean-Luc, now he's tweaked everything with Sparcraft, and it looked very good, but boy, it was tiny, compared. You just had to go, boom, boom, you're kidding me. You wouldn't have even thought they were the same boat. There's a lot in this, and there'll be a lot of things come out. I can't wait to talk to Jean-Luc when he gets back about everything that's going on in the race. He'll be very fascinating to sit down and chat. We'll do a lot of this with here live. I'm actually in Jean-Luc's place at the moment. He might be sitting there, and I might be here, and we'll be talking about all sorts of things. I certainly hope to be talking to Suzy. I mean, in the months ahead. Not right now. She's getting her own space, and so there's still a lot to be said about this. But I don't think the 1.5 meters had anything to do with saving Jean-Luc's rig over Suzy's. Simon Hawks asked, the ham weather reports that the entrants are getting are pretty comprehensive. They're using Windy TY to talk to the entrants and give them a definition of the weather that's coming and so on. And does he think do I think that that's more bordering close towards routing, or is it the fact that the entrants themselves have got a good understanding, so once they're told what's going on in the weather, they can work out where they are going to go? And yes, that's definitely the case. I think all the entrants are reasonably aware, to the point if they say there's this over there and there's that over there and this is here and this is the projection for the next few days, they'd write all this down, and they would then actually make their own plans of where they're going. No one would have no one's getting weather routing. I'm confident of that. I'm not listening to all the radio calls, but other people are. And if anyone was getting anything that looked like weather routing, I'm sure we'd be told. And I don't think that's the case at all. One thing I will say, there's one we've tried to get a cap on really quickly. One of the ham operators is actually putting weather routing images up with their reports on Facebook, and we've told them that's got to be stopped immediately, because that associates weather routing, like proper programmed weather routing, with an entrant they're talking to, and that's a no. So we've warned them that that's got to stop straight away, and hopefully it does. Otherwise, we would have to try and make some sort of restriction there, so that the entrants aren't associated with that operator who's actually using a weather routing program. And there will be some changes on that in 22. We're going back to no access to Windy TY and Predict Wind or any of those sophisticated weather forecasting programs. It'll just be normal, traditional government weather forecasting for 22. Rightio. So La Lunga, Rita, what's happened to Suzy? Is she back yet? Well, I think everyone knows she's back, and it's fantastic, and I think she handles herself so well. I can't imagine what she's going through right now, in the wash-up of all of this. What she's gone through has never, ever happened to me. It's happened to very few people. I think she's handling herself incredibly well. She's just such a champion. Her little press conference down there was exactly right. There's this balance, and I know, we are challenged sometimes on how best to portray everything that happens in the GGR. We try not to over-dramatise it. We try to be factual, but we still try to explain and convey the feeling of what's really happening. And sometimes that's dramatic. We're not trying to up the ante on all of this. We just try to give you an understanding and a feeling for what's really going on. And, Suzy's handling herself really well, and she knows she's got a lot of fans, and she's trying to get that balance as well and tell everyone what's going on. She said that she's going to, talk about the whole thing later on. It's just too close at the moment. I think everyone understands that. So sometime in the next couple of months, after Christmas, whatever, when she's fully recovered and reflected on everything that's happened, I'm sure we'll hear the detail on all that went on during the lead up to the pitch pole and losing her mast and everything that's happening from there. And we're quite prepared to sit and wait and listen. I mean, there's a lot of things from our part, from GGR side, that we went through, and we've got all that there. And even we talk about the main points, but we sit on a lot of the detail, and that'll all come out later as well. So, but she's a champion, and we wish her well in the next couple of months while she has a bit of a kickback, and she has absolutely committed. She said to this on the satellite phone, before, that she's adamant about being here for when Jean-Luc gets here, and Mark and Uku and stuff. So it'll be great to see her. That'll be quite something. Marion Shirley, Tapio, did he clean his hull yet? No. He's had shark problems, and he's been a bit freaked out on that now. So he's resigned himself to the reality of being a bit slow, and get here to Les Sables d'Olonne when he can. So that's really about it. We've got this ongoing race between Mark and Jean-Luc, which is incredible. Uku is running in third place. He's got a podium place, which is incredible, and he's really keen to get around Cape Horn. And it looks like he's going to get a reasonable run. Still, it's funny. You get around Cape Horn and you think it's all over. He's got a long way to go to the finish. So's Jean-Luc. So's Mark Slats. Istvan is running in fourth place, right? And if you think back to the Atlantic leg again, wow, how cool is that? He was running he was the last boat in the fleet. Now he's running fourth, and Tapio's still hanging in there. So all good stuff. Thinking of Igor, Mark Sinclair, great job. I fully understand the reason why he's not carrying on. He had a lot of fun, and who knows? His adventuring's not over yet. We'll probably see him again. You certainly see him in Les Sables d'Olonne, and who knows? There's another event on in 22. Thanks a lot. We'll see you again next week.